my fellow Trollops. I come to you today with another Lonely Trollope. This is a part of Steve Donoghue's read-along of standalone novels, of some of the standalone novels of Anthony Trollope. This month is Mr. Scarborough's Family, which I have coming late to the party. Record my impressions on the first 40 chapters of the novel. I don't know where Steve's at, and we go from there. So yeah, just heads up that that's what I'll be talking about. I don't think I have massive spoilers. It's not a spoilerish book in a way. Published in 1883. This was published at least as a novel posthumously. This is one of Trollope's last novels. I guess he had a fair bit in the pipe because there's a couple more after this, but this seems to be generally seen as his last kind of full kind of great novel. My head is places. That's part of the reason why I didn't do a usual video on the first 20 chapters when I should have, and I'm kind of getting around to the combined 40 chapters a little bit late, but forgive me, and I'll give you my impressions in hopefully a short amount of time, because then I've got off to work. So yes, Mr. Scarborough's Family publishes a book in 1883 following Mr. Scarborough's family, which is John Scarborough and his two sons, and they're all basically scumbags, retrobates to one degree or another. Montjoy, the eldest of the sons, is a gambling addict and a sort of a brute, and has amassed massive debt, which John Scarborough, Mr. Scarborough, I'll just call him Mr. Scarborough from now on, Senior, has seen that, like, oh, what's going to happen is all the creditors are going to come by, and they're going to basically, once he dies and he is ill, they're going to take all of the money and all the lands of the Scarboroughs for them to pay off the elder son's debt. And he hatches a plan. He hatches a plan that says, like, actually, I had me and Mrs. Scarborough had Montjoy before we were married, so he is an illegitimate son. He is a bastard son in the parlance, and thus he's not inherited. He's not going to inherit all this stuff, and it's going to stymie all of the creditors who are again in this anti-Semitic time are characterized as Jews, and we're gonna cheat those Jews out of the monies and lands and all that stuff, and it's all going to devolve to Augustus, the second son. Augustus, in kind of rather chilling interactions that he has with various characters throughout the book, is a sociopath. Is somebody who is quite happy to do whatever is necessary to get done in a very bone-chilling way, as long as he gets what he wants. What happens is this happens to Montjoy. Montjoy is really upset. He is financed to a cousin, Florence Mountjoy, who doesn't want to marry him, is actually interested in this fellow, Harry Ansley. Harry Ansley gets in a fight with Harry Ansley, gets knocked down. Ansley's just like, fine, whatever, and walks off. And he knocked his head, so he was out. He could have been dead. And indeed, he leaves him, and then Mountjoy seems to have disappeared. Now, of course, if he had been dead, there'd be a body there, and you'd sort of know that he was indeed dead. But it turns out that actually Augustus has, with the assistance of Augustus, they kind of got him out of the country, and he's gambling in Europe with given him some money by Augustus to basically stay out of town. And Augustus, who's like, oh, I've inherited all of the older son's monies and all that. I also want his fiancée. And so he spreads very, the most damning truth after kind of pressing Harry on the situation. Augustus presses Harry on the situation, and it's like basically ends up, Harry just basically denies everything, denies, which Augustus knows is a lie. And then he goes around saying, he lied. He left my brother for dead in the thing. He in the streets. He's a complete reprobate. He knocked a man down and left him for dead, and paints him in the worst possible light. there is some truth going on there. Harry later says that it's because it was a fight about Florence Mountjoy that he didn't want to actually admit to it and bring her name up in public. Perhaps you can if you're sympathetic to Harry, you might see it that way. If you're less sympathetic to Harry, you might say, oh, he's probably just trying to, he didn't really care if Mountjoy was dead or not, and kind of walked off. Was rather kind of he should have at least maybe, pushed a police officer to go pick up Mountjoy, and just in case he did need medical attention. But be that as may, Augustus said, I'm going to get Florence. So goes to Harry Annesley's, not father, because his father is a reverend and relatively, not too much in the way of money, but goes to his uncle, who has kind of adopted him as Uncle Prosper, has adopted him as a thing, and fills his head full of plenty of basically mistruths or half-truths about the whole situation. Basically spreads around town, makes Harry's name mud. And Mr. Prosper, who's like, maybe that would be kind of convenient to me, disinherits Harry. So Harry becomes a penniless guy, thus maybe clearing the way for Augustus. Not that Augustus seems to have, in these first 40 chapters, go much further. So, the Scarboroughs, the father and the two sons, are all, they're scum. They're not great. Mr. Gray, their lawyer, who is a kind of an honorable man, a good lawyer, but also kind of feels duty bound to serve the family that he is the lawyer for. He and his daughter, Dorothy Gray, who is one of these great Trollope women, who is just like basically, you're too good for all the men in this book, who indeed doesn't want to marry anyone else because she's so devoted to her father, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Mr. Gray's assessment of the Scarboroughs: the father has been a great knave. He has set the laws of this country at defiance, and should be punished most severely. And Mountjoy Scarborough has proved himself to be unfit to have any money in his hands. A man so reckless is little better than a lunatic. But compared with Augustus, they are both estimable, amiable men. The father has ideas of philanthropy, and Mountjoy is simply mad. But Augustus is dishonest as either of them, and is odious also all round, which is a very good way of summing up the Scarboroughs. And indeed, I read the first 20 chapters of this book, and I kind of put it aside, and I didn't come back to it, because it was just like, do I want to spend more time with these scumbags? But I did come back to it. I did come back to it for the next 20 chapters, and the next 20 chapters, actually, for a good hunk of it, you're seeing much more of Harry Annesley, Florence Mountjoy, Dorothy, and the Carrolls, who make a very good counterpoint to Dorothy Gray and her father. The Carrolls, who Mr. Gray is supporting, who basically demand money from him because he's basically their father. He's the one who's actually kind of sensible and funds, and is like going to help the daughters get married off. Of course, as Amelia gets hooked up with this Mr. Juniper, who's basically in it for the money and is bargaining hard. He wants his £500 if he's going to marry this girl, and he's like, well, okay, I'll do $450. 50 of which goes to her for her clothes, and he's like, I want the full amount. Kind of, he's like, yeah, just the kind of guy you would want to marry. But they're not as sensible and kind of as sharp-eyed as Dorothy and Mr. Gray are. The Carrolls are completely frivolous and dopes in comparison. We get Florence Mountjoy, who gets whisked out of the country because her family does not want her. Her mother and most importantly, her aunt, Lady Mountjoy, do not want her to marry Harry Annesley, who they've heard all these bad things about, and they want her to marry Mountjoy. And if it isn't going to be Mountjoy, because apparently he's completely been ruined, and he doesn't have money, they picked another candidate for him, Mr. Anderson, who because he works for a Sir Magnus, who is a kind of ambassador in the I can't remember which European city we were in. I think somewhere in Switzerland, is pushed heavily as, marry him instead. Then we'll get you to marry him. And she's like, no, I'm not marrying him. And Mr. Anderson comes across as kind of a fripperous kind of little twerp. she definitely kind of shuts him down, and shuts him down as bluntly as apparently these books can. You just really want, at some points in these books with Victorian ladies being pursued by young gentlemen, you just want the Victorian lady to just sock them one and just stomp off. I'd love to see that, but I guess that's not the whole texture of Victorian society, and what they'd probably end up being confined to a madhouse if that happened. But yeah, it's like, so Florence is ride or die for Harry Annesley. Harry Annesley, who's has been disinherited by his uncle Prosper, and there's a totally comedic scene of Prosper kind of going to court Matilda Thoroughbung, who is this kind of I think she's in her 40s lady. I think she's a widow once, and she is incredibly sensible, and she's extremely blunt about, okay, this is our money situations. This is how I'm going to go negotiate. And he's just like, oh, this is terrible. Oh my God. And he walks off, and apparently the other prospect actually took off with some kind of young, hunky, farmer's son guy. So he's like, oh God, women, oh my goodness. So he's, Mr. Prosper probably would probably better off, remaining a bachelor and just supporting Harry. But at this point in the story, he's still like, oh, I don't want to, his mind is, he's such a weak-minded fellow. Is being easily pulled the strings by Augustus Scarborough. Now, the thing with this, what's happened though, is we circle back to the Scarboroughs, is Augustus, because he is such a odious, cold-blooded, I really get like a talented Mr. Ripley kind of level of just sort of like sociopath. He's like, I've got the money, great. Well, bye, Dad. Make sure you die quickly. Die quicker. And he's very open about it, to the point where Mr. Scarborough regrets actually giving this second son all the money and stuff like that. And he's like, well, actually, Mountjoy, he's a bit of a scamp. And, you can see how Mountjoy, who was spoiled by his Mr. Scarborough, was raised as a egomaniacal little id monster. He's like, oh, maybe he's decided, I'll play another little trick. He's always manipulating things. Scarborough, he's like, he delights in twisting the law to his own things, and he delights moving around his sons, yanking the chains on his sons. And so he decides, okay, well then Augustus is gonna get the land, but it's gonna be the land stripped bare. I'm gonna give any goods and everything like that. I'm gonna unload to Mountjoy, just to dig it to Augustus. Further, I'm also going to invite Harry Annesley over, and I'm going to try and repair things with his clueless uncle, Mr. Prosper, to kind of hopefully entail him, even if I can't give him money himself. Maybe he will give him money himself, but at this point it seems more like, we're going to try and do all that, and you can marry Florence Mountjoy, even though Scarborough's like, okay, well, I'll come back. And it's like, and Mr. Grey, who is much better of being almost like a father figure to this brute of a gambling addict, completely fallen guy, is like, well, look, maybe you get this money, we'll put it in trust for you, we'll get you married, we'll try and do things like, you're going to be a gambler all your life, obviously, but we'll give you like an allowance, and we'll try and regulate your life so you're actually, it's a functioning life, and you're not just completely dragged down to ruin completely. Maybe we can redeem you. And he's like, okay, we'll do that, but I only want to marry Florence Mountjoy. It's like, and Mr. Scarborough's like, no, that's not going to happen. That's not part of my plans. Mr. Scarborough, there's a part of it that kind of reminds me of sort of like the Brothers Karamazov, and he's like kind of the father there who's messed with his sons and stuff like that. There's another sense that I almost get that Mr. Scarborough is sort of like an author. He's an author who delights in kind of pulling strings and manipulating things. There's almost a little bit of a like, what does an author do to his characters in a novel, and delights in kind of entertaining himself and his readers or her readers. But and it's like there's a sense it's like, this is a little bit of an author portrait, not of human beings in his actual life, but of how you like to kind of yank the chains of your characters for the entertainment of your readers to make a good story. And you get the sense that Mr. Scarborough, who, you know, as a human being is just like, he is as contemptible as his sons, but as a kind of an idea of kind of like an author manipulating characters. It's where I'm grasping for straws to kind of get a little bit of that glee that Mr. Scarborough gets. Is like, well, is this the glee that a reader gets? So yeah, that is my little summary, my 16 whatever minute summary of this hunk of of Mr. Scarborough's family. I'll probably now go and take a look and see where Steve is at in the read along, and I'll either drop it immediately or I'll wait until he's slightly caught up. He could be chopping this up into finer bits. I know I went past a part section and it's rather awkward. I can see Steve splitting it up a little bit better. I'll put links down below to both of the videos that he has done already, so you can hear more measured and experienced thoughts on this and that. And so yes, that's what I have so far in this month of rather messed up month for myself. Hanging in there. More videos later.